Want help to grow your business? Download BRiN, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit BRiN.ai or search the App Store today.
Hi, I'm Pip McKay and welcome to Evolve Now, where we look at the mindset and the emotional intelligence for success and happiness. And in today's program, we're going to look at how to stop the negative influence of parents. We've all heard it, haven't we? Oh, I didn't want to ever be like my parent, and then you have a child and you find yourself saying exactly the same thing you wish you'd never say to your child that your parents said to you. So we're going to look at this and also how it affects business success as well. So what are we going to cover? We're going to cover why do we repeat the patterns of our parents? The 4 negative responses to parents, how parental programming affects money, relationships and health, how to stop repeating patterns of parents, and the buck stops here, don't pass it on to your kids. So let's get started. So it's this interesting phenomenon of why it is that people often repeat patterns of parents. And especially when there's a certain age in our life where we go, oh, I just never want to be like my parents. So what's really interesting is that between the ages of 0 and 7, we tend to be a bit like a sponge, and we're picking up values, beliefs, emotions from our parents. And that's all getting stored in the unconscious mind here. And then what happens is between, the ages, and that might continue going on till you're about 9 or 10 or 11, and then there comes a point where you really don't want to be like your parents. You really are rebelling against your parents. And all of that doesn't seem like it's going to be similar to parents, it still gets stored in the unconscious mind. But can you see that even when you're rebelling against your parents, it's still a reflection of your parents? You're still doing something in reaction or response to your parents. So you're still looking back at who are my parents so that you can decide that you don't want to be like them. And all of this process stops us from really going, well, who am I? And how do I want to move forward as my authentic self? What is really my passion and purpose? Because say your parents want you to be a doctor, and say when you're a little kid, you want to be a doctor because it's similar to what your parents want. And then you get to be a teenager and you decide, I don't want to be a doctor because that's what my parents wanted to be. And then all of a sudden you're totally confused. Do I really want to be a doctor or do I not want to be a doctor? And both of those are influencing you. And you may decide, I really don't want to be a doctor, only to find out later on that that would be a perfect career for you, and you've rebelled against it and kind of thrown the baby out with the bathwater. So we're going to look at how this all works and how does this process happen and why it happens. So in terms of my own life, my mum is an amazing person. So she pretty much, from the age of 9, she brought us up by myself because my father had passed away. And she was an amazing woman. She was a university lecturer. Later on, she worked for the UN. She's had a massive impact on government in places like Cambodia. She was in the first people who went to Kosovo to look at what did the Kosovo people need in order to make sure money, government money and non-government money was being spent properly in Kosovo. She's an amazing woman and she's had an impact on the world. And so there's a lot of positive influence that I get from my mum, particularly as a sense of a woman being able to achieve whatever they want. And that's been a tremendously positive influence from her. But my mum also had a negative influence on me, and you can understand why. As a single mum who's also a career woman, you can imagine that she would be very busy a lot of the time. And like many mums, having kids meant that she's more likely to put her kids first and other people first and her job first, because she's got to have the money to be able to support her kids, and she's got kids that she's bringing up who are young. So that meant that she was putting herself last. And she was also very stressed, and she was working a lot, and she was very stressed. And later on in her life, that created high blood pressure and kidney disease, which was not a good thing for her. Now, me as a little kid, growing up from 0 to 7, even before my father died, it was my mum who was working, not my father. And so I'm picking up a whole bunch of programming. I'm picking up a whole lot of beliefs, a whole lot of emotions, a whole lot of values from my mum. And as much as I was picking up a lot of positive ones that I want to keep, yes, but I was also picking up a lot of negative ones, a lot of ones about putting everybody else's needs above my own, that you've got to just push through, you've just got to push through everything, that it doesn't matter whether you're tired or stressed, just keep going. Don't rest. Don't take time out for yourself. These are all the sort of pieces of programming that I picked up from my mum. And that created a real kind of workaholic behaviour and also a people-pleasing behaviour. So you please others and you work hard. And so by the time I was, in my 30s, 35, I had really burnt out my adrenals, and that was really having a big impact on my health. And I had to really be able to find a way that I could make sure that I was taking the positive influence of my mother whilst I was letting go of the negative influence of my mother. And I think this is an important thing for all of us. So it's not about I'm rebelling against my mother, I don't want to be anything like her. It's about letting go of that negative influence. Now, I certainly rebelled against my mother. I was a very rebellious teenager, like many of you. I think a lot of entrepreneurs have that secret maverick, and they certainly don't want to do anything that anybody tells them to do. And that's very much been a part of my life as well. And so my rebellion from my mother meant, that I was going out, I was doing some things that were quite dangerous because, if my mum said I had to be home at a certain time, I wouldn't be. I was like very kind of outrageous and quite wild as I was trying to rebel. And that wasn't actually good for me either. And it wasn't until I could let go of both adopting and rebelling against my mother's behaviour that I started to really step into myself. Now, there's a couple of other things that go along with this as well. So we've got adopting and rebelling, and we can see that they're both responses that can be negative and have a negative influence on us. But there's also escaping and compensating. So one of the other things about my mum was that she's quite a strong personality. And in a lot of ways, in order for me to step into what I felt my personality was, I really kind of needed to leave home. Now, like a lot of people in X generation, do you remember that? We all left home at 18. So I left home and I was absolutely adamant that I would never live at home again or never have that kind of support. So there was a lot of kind of escaping from some of the support that I could have had that might have made certain aspects of my life a lot easier at that age. And then there was compensating. So one of the other things that my mother did was she was very kind of, if she was telling you off, she would be like this and she'd be telling you what you should do. And I sometimes saw my mother treating other people like this. And she would also ask for things that I found really embarrassing. Like, she would get people to do things for her and I'd be like, Mum, maybe they're busy. Maybe they don't have time to carry your things up the stairs or whatever. But my mother felt perfectly happy about asking for what she wants. Nowadays, I think that's actually a great trait. But for me, I compensated for that. So I would never ask anyone for anything. I would never ask anyone to help me. I would never ask because I didn't want them to feel put upon like I felt my mother put upon others. So we can see these compensatory mechanisms for parental programming. What was really great was when I let go of that parental programming, it meant that I could look at things in terms of context rather than in terms of rules. So the problem with parental programming is that we can set up rules that might have been right in a specific context, but may not be right in your context. So, for example, adopting the behaviour of, having to put other people's needs above your own, whilst also working really hard to support a family as a single mum, was not my context. So maybe my mother needed to do that. I don't know. Maybe she could have found other ways of doing it. I don't know. But she certainly was in a situation where it was more likely that she needed to do that than me. I didn't have a family to be looking after. I did not have to support a family financially. So why would I be doing the same behaviour as what my mother needed to do in a completely different context? Yeah, I needed to be able to look at my context, and instead of following a rule of I have to be a workaholic, which is what I've kind of adopted from my mother, I need to be able to go, what is the context here and what is required where I can work in a way that is fun and enjoyable for me and gives me wellbeing and lifestyle. Does that make sense? And then the rebelling. So rather than feeling like in order to have any fun, I have to rebel against my mum and stay out late and do all of these things, which became, even when I wasn't even living at home anymore, I was still doing that behaviour. When I didn't need to rebel against her, I wasn't living at home. But it was almost like in my mind, my mother was still there and I had to rebel against that. And it's like once I was able to let go of that, I could go out, have a nice social time and decide to go home when I wanted to. What was right for me in my context, rather than I have to stay out late and be the last one home because I'm rebelling. Yeah, so there's that rule. I have to do that because I'm rebelling. There's a rule that's been created. And that rule was stopping me having choice in the context that I found myself in. And the same with escaping. Once I was able to let go of escaping from my mum and what I considered to be her influence, it was easier for me to have a much better relationship with my mum. I could ask her opinion about things without feeling like I was going to be dominated. I could feel choice. And my mother's and my relationship improved dramatically as my mother moved more into that friendship place, where instead of having to adopt or rebel against her like a child or a teenager, I could go, okay, I'm an adult, my mum's an adult, she's an amazing person, and I want to get to know this person as a person, not just as my mother, because I like her and I enjoy the time that I have with her. And then finally, I call that the young adult phase. And finally, the mature adult phase, instead of compensating for my mum, I could go, well, hang on a minute, do I need help in this situation? And does that person look like they'd be happy to help me? Maybe I could ask for that help and I'm not putting upon. And this has been really great to let this go, because with my own partner, I found a situation where I was never asking for any help from him. And he loves that. He loves to be asked for help and assistance. And being able to let go of that made it much easier for me to then say to him, oh, it'd be lovely if you could come and assist me. And he was like, oh, wonderful, I feel needed and wanted. And he loves that. And I could be able to change my behaviour for the context, rather than have a rule that I can never ask anyone for anything because I'm putting upon them. So we can see that all of these 4 responses, adopting, rebelling, escaping and compensating, are all part of parental programming. And they all can create rules that may not serve us in the present moment. And it's really important for us to be able to let go of them. But one of the interesting things is what happens in the subconscious or unconscious mind when we create these rules. Basically, if we think of the unconscious mind as about 96% of the mind's capacity and the conscious mind as about 4% of the mind's capacity. Now, these figures come from an interview I did with one of Australia's most preeminent scientists called Professor Snyder, and he works at Sydney University at the Centre for the Mind. And he is one of the world's preeminent scientists, and he studies the mind at the Centre for the Mind. And he really has studied excellence and what makes a champion mindset. He was somebody who was asked to do a symposium on the champion mindset during the Olympics in Australia. And he's also someone who studied savants. So those are people who have a genius in one area, like drawing or mathematics, but they aren't generally socially functional or functional in other areas of their life. So if you think of Rain Man, somebody like that, he was a genius mathematically, but he wasn't able to really function in any other area of his life. And what his study in the mind was does somebody have to have that inability to function in most areas of their life in order to have the genius? Does that?
To continue enjoying this presentation, download BRiN, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit BRiN.ai or search the App Store today.